Good afternoon, Facebook. This is Brother Perry Williams. I'm finally getting back on live today. I shared yesterday with the church that it's kind of hard to set a time and just keep doing these at a certain time. Things come up and things happen, so it has to change plans and stuff like that. But I still want to try to do one every day. I'm going to try to, Lord willing. And but what I did tell the church yesterday, I'm going to do one every day, but it might be 7 in the morning, it might be noon, it might be 5, 6 o'clock in the evening, it might be 7 o'clock in the evening. So if you'll stay tuned, or set your notifications on Facebook or whatever, you'll be able to catch up with them, or just simply go to Jonesboro Facebook page and you'll be able to go back and review some of these that we're doing every day. So we're in Daniel chapter 4, and just want to look at this. It's kind of a story. It's actually it's the king himself telling the story of his life and something that happened to him. Remember, Daniel's written in Hebrew for the first chapter and into the second chapter a little bit, and then it's Aramaic, which is the Gentile language at the time, but then it's written back in Hebrew time you get back up around chapter 7 and 8. It's a really cool book to read this way. But chapter 4 wasn't written by Daniel. Chapter 4 was actually written by King Nebuchadnezzar himself. Okay, it's about something that happened to him in a dream that he had. Now this kind of got a moral to it. Okay, is what it is, and we'll share that at the end of it. But basically, what happened is there's something happened in King Nebuchadnezzar's life. He had it was almost like he had been converted or been saved. He had a change of heart about God Almighty. All right, because this is about when Daniel's 50-something years old. I mean, he's really getting up there in age now, and he's not a young man anymore. Babylon is really growing big. It's huge. It's a world government that King Nebuchadnezzar is over. But the first part of chapter 4, like I said, we believe that King Nebuchadnezzar actually wrote his memoirs himself by the way it's written. So, and it's talking about something that happened to him in his life. But he's given God glory and praise for everything that goes on. So I want to start here with this. It says, King Nebuchadnezzar, to the peoples, nations, this is chapter 4, Daniel, and men of every language to live in all the world, may you prosper greatly. Now remember, King Nebuchadnezzar was a really evil person. He really was. He was very violent. He had control of everything. There was nobody greater than him. And it says, it is my pleasure to tell you about the miraculous signs and wonders that the Most High God has performed for me. You remember chapter 3 ended with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had been thrown in the fiery furnace. So he had a change of heart. Somewhere during this time period, he realized how there is a God in heaven and how great he actually is. It says, how great are his signs, how mighty is his wonders. His kingdom is an eternal kingdom. His dominion endures from generation to generation. And at the end of chapter 3, he told that anybody says anything about the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that they would be basically destroyed in their homes and everything else, and basically remembered no more. But he has something's going on with his life. Even though he's given God credit, he's kind of exalted himself by his splendor. Now, I kind of look at this also because of like Lucifer. We read in Isaiah about Lucifer, the fallen angel that became Satan, and he corrupted himself by his splendor, his glory. He saw how beautiful he was and everything, and how everybody, all the other angels adored him, and he basically sinned because he wanted some worship of himself. That's where we find King Nebuchadnezzar at right here. He's looking at everything he's got, and it's pride that's going on in his heart. And he has this dream. But he realizes it's come from God, but he needs an interpretation from it. It says, Nebuchadnezzar was at home in my palace, content and prosperous. All right? He's talking about how prosperity's been there. He's content with everything that's going on. And he had a dream. And I'm going to give you the dream here, okay? He said, I had a dream that made me afraid as I was lying on my bed. The images and visions had passed through my mind and terrified me, okay? It says he called in all of his magicians, all right, and his enchanters and diviners and astrologers, and they could not tell him his dream, or not interpret his dream. He told it to him, but they couldn't interpret it. But finally, Daniel comes in. He comes into the picture, and he knows Daniel can interpret this because he has before. So he tells Daniel the dream, all right? And here's what he tells him. He says, I know that the Spirit of the Holy God is within you, and mystery no mystery is too difficult for you. Here's my dream, interpret it for me. And he says this, there are the visions. These are the visions I saw while lying on my bed. I looked, and there before me stood a tree in the middle of the land. Its height was enormous, okay? The tree grew large and strong, and its top touched the sky. It was visible to the ends of the earth. Its leaves were beautiful, its fruit abundant, and it was food for all. Under it the beasts of the field found shelter, and the birds of the air lived in its branches. From it every creature was fed. So this tree is this huge tree, and it's taking care of all creatures that are found itself in its vicinity. But it says this, in the vision I saw while laying on my bed, I looked, and there before me was a messenger, an angel, a holy one coming down from heaven. He called in a loud voice, cut down the tree and trim off its branches, strip off its leaves, and scatter its fruit. Let the animals flee from underneath it, and the birds from its branches. But let the stump and its roots, bound with iron and bronze, remain in the ground. In the grass of the field, let him be drenched with the dew of heaven, and let him live with the animals among the plants of the earth. Let his mind be changed from that of a man, and let him be given the mind of an animal till 7 times pass by him, or 7 years go by. All right? So this was the decision that was proclaimed by the messenger, okay, of what was going to happen. It came from the Most High God. It came from God himself. And he's telling this dream, or he's telling this vision, showing it to King Nebuchadnezzar. Now he wants an interpretation of it, okay? Daniel has a problem right here, and I can see his concern by the way he says. He says, this is the dream that I, King Nebuchadnezzar, had had. Now, Belteshazzar, which was the name that Nebuchadnezzar had changed Daniel's name to, Daniel's Hebrew name, and Belteshazzar is the name that was given to Daniel as actually the name of King Nebuchadnezzar's God before he met the true God. He said, tell me what it means, and no one other wise men of my kingdom can interpret it for me, but you can. And he says this, he goes on. He goes on to tell the story, or tell the interpretation of this dream. And he tells him, he repeats it back to him in the next few verses, okay? Before he goes on and tells him everything. But then he goes on to say this. He says, you are that tree. And the last part of that vision that he had kind of says it, because it changes from the tree to the word him. All right? Let him have the mind of a beast, and so on and so forth. But Daniel comes to him, and he's kind of a little bit nervous about it. He wished it was for somebody else, or maybe for the king's enemies. But here's what he said. You, king of that tree, you have become great and strong. Your greatness has grown until it reaches the sky, and your dominion exceeds to the distant parts of the earth. And he goes on to tell him what's going on with this. All right? This tree, he's telling the king, and I could see where Daniel might be concerned for the fear of his life, considering that, you know what, he's sitting here telling the dream that something's about ready to happen to you, king. Daniel's not the bearer of good news here. But by the time we get to verse 25 of Daniel chapter 4, it says, you will be driven away from people, and you will live with the wild animals. You will eat grass like cattle, be drenched with the dew of heaven. 7 times will you pass until you acknowledge that the Most High God is sovereign over the kingdoms of men and gives them to anyone he wishes. That's kind of wild right here. King's had a dream, and he wants interpretation of it. And this last verse talking about until you acknowledge that the Most High God is sovereign over the kingdoms. Now, he's been giving praise to God back here. All right, so it's kind of there's something else that's going to happen in the future, apparently, because he's been giving praise to God. But his glory is overwhelming him. His pride of all that he's accomplished is beginning to come into effect, okay? But he tells him this, that this is going to happen to him. He's going to be driven away from people. He's going to become like a wild beast, okay? And he's going to eat grass in the field. Now, the messenger did say, don't, cut the tree down, but leave its stump and leave its roots and have it guarded with bronze and iron so it can't be hurt. And he goes on to say that. Daniel comes to the point, and Daniel realizes this dream is talking about him losing everything he's got. And Daniel tells him by verse 27, he says, you know what? Therefore, O king, be pleased to accept my advice. Renounce your sins by doing what is right, and your wickedness by being kind to the oppressed. It may be that when your prosperity will continue. So Daniel's saying, you know what? You need to give God glory now. You need to do what's right. You need to help the people that are oppressed in your kingdom and everything. So maybe this won't happen to you. Now, we believe in prayers and stuff like that, and I believe that God does answer prayer. And basically, Daniel's saying, there's something going to happen to you in the future. Get it right now so it doesn't happen to you, and maybe God will not do what he says he's going to do. So some times went by, all right? About a year has went by. Maybe King Nebuchadnezzar's forgot about the dream or whatever, because nothing's changed at this point. It says this, 12 months later, as the king was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon. You know how big the palace was? This palace was 6 miles. It was huge, 6 miles in square or whatever. It just a huge palace. What an awesome thing he had. Matter of fact, the Hanging Gardens in Babylon was one of the 7 wonders of the world. This was a beautiful place. But as he's walking on the roof, he's looking out over all this kingdom that he's been put in charge of. And here's what happens that causes his vision to come true. He said, "Is not this the great Babylon I have built as the royal residence by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty?" So he looked out and he saw everything that he had, the wealth that he had, the power he had, the authority he had, and he looked down and says, "Man, look what I've done. I did all this. This is the great Babylon that I did myself for the glory of my majesty." And while the words were still in his mouth, it says, all of a sudden, there was words that come down, okay? And a voice came out from heaven and said this is what is decreed for you, King Nebuchadnezzar. Your royal authority has been taken from you. And exactly what the dream said. He was driven out. More than likely, he was probably driven out into a field that was probably fenced in, taken care of, and guarded. Now, that doesn't really give us much information about this, but he ended up becoming like a wild animal. All right, his mind was taken from him. He ate grass like the cattle of the field, and for 7 years the dew watered his back. Matter of fact, it said his hair grew like the feathers of an eagle, and his fingernails grew like claws of a bird, and he was like a wild animal, totally insane. Now, I don't know if this was schizophrenia, whether paranoia, whatever it was. It's not any type of disease. It really doesn't coincide with demon possession or anything else. It's just, I think he was overwhelmed of whatever God, this would come from God. It was something that happened to him that God took his mind away from him to become a wild animal. But like I said, the Bible doesn't say anything about his affairs. Apparently his advisors and stuff still took care of the kingdom. Maybe Daniel was one of them, since he was really high in authority, that managed to keep the kingdom together. We really don't have much detail there. But the vision that he had a promise in it that one day when you acknowledge that God is sovereign over all, then everything will be restored back to you. All right, now for 7 years he did this. And it says this. Now remember, this is his memoirs. He's telling us himself. He says, "At the end of that time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes toward heaven, and my sanity was restored. And then I praised the Most High. I honored and glorified him who lives forever. His dominion is an eternal dominion. His kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the peoples of the earth were regarded as nothing. He does as he pleases with the powers of heaven and the peoples of the earth. No one can hold back his hand or say to him, 'What have you done?'" He realized that he had made a mistake by proclaiming that he had done all that magic. He had created Babylon by his own hand. God put him there. God had put him as a king. He gave him his splendor, his authority, and his glory and majesty. Gave him wealth of the earth and everything else, but it was God who did it to him. He did nothing that God had not passed through that came out of God's hand. But it says this, "At the same time that my sanity was restored, my honor and splendor returned to me for the glory of my kingdom. My advisors and nobles sought me out, and I was restored to my throne and become even greater than before." All right? The very last verse of this says this, "Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and glorify the King, capital K, of heaven, because everything he does is right and all his ways are just, and those who walk in pride he is able to humble." We see a picture of a king that was given authority by God, that was given treasures and given wealth and given majesty by God, who looked out over everything he had, and he became prideful. Basically, the moral of this story is, okay, this king was a really wicked king at one time. Remember, this is Babylon. This is what the Revelations talks about the spirit of Babylon. It's referring back to the Babylon and how great Babylon was, but also how wicked Babylon was. But at the end of this king was restored. He thought he had done everything himself, and because of pride. So the basic moral of this story is this: you know what? We have nothing that doesn't come through God's hands. I hear people all the time says, you know what? I work for a living. I do this, I do that, and you know what? The only reason why you can work for a living is because God gives you strength, gives you breath in your lungs, gives you a heart that's beating, gives you hands that you can lift or write or a mind to think. The only reason why you're making money is because God's allowing you to make money. The only reason why you have authority is because God's allowed you to have authority. And that even goes for very wicked people. Okay, you're listening? Give God glory. That's what this whole story is about. Give God glory. Don't ever think for yourself that you've done anything by your own hands that God did not have a hand in. King Nebuchadnezzar was restored because he acknowledged who God was. Make sure you acknowledge him today, okay? We're getting some pretty wild stuff here. By the time we get through, we got 2 more chapters here before we get into some more prophecy stuff. We'll be talking about Daniel and Lion's Den. We'll be talking about his grandson, so to say, that actually had something very scary happen to him. He saw a hand around the wall, and he trembled. His knees became weak. So these next 2 chapters are going to be pretty unique, but then we're getting back into Bible prophecy of some things that's happened that we've already talked about, but it's also going to start revealing some things that's going to happen at the end, even given times and dates. So, this is Brother Perry. God bless you. You have a great day.